Hello, my name is Andrea and I'm your co-host for tonight.
My name is Bucky, and I am paying attention closely to my phone because Lorie is going to be a little bit late tonight. I will keep my attention on that phone so that we are ready to go when she joins us. So I'd like to kick this discussion off in regards to an assignment that we had. We received an assignment from a requesting consumer. When we disseminated the assignment amongst our interpreting community, we received a response that indicated that some interpreters were triggered by the nature of the assignment. After having some discussion with this interpreter, we thought that it would be appropriate to have an open discussion with the community that we serve in order to improve our practices as we service the community with our interpreting services. So we received a request from a nonprofit organization who tends to delve deeply into unpacking racism, white privilege, and matters of that nature. And so that nonprofit organization was providing 4 workshops within a series. And that workshop series, they were looking to find an interpreter so that, an appropriate interpreter so that they could provide access to that workshop series. Unfortunately, they could not find an interpreter, a singular interpreter who could service all 4 workshops. Though they did try, we ended up finding an interpreter who was able to do the first couple of workshops. However, we were tasked with having to find the final interpreter. And so as we sent that request out, the wording of that request is as follows. We'll show it on the screen in a moment. Hello, Lorie.
Hi, Lorie. Welcome.
Hello. Thank you.
So, Lorie, I just offered an introduction for myself. Andrea introduced herself. If you don't mind, please.
Hello, everyone. My name is Lorie Sims. This is my sign name, an L on the cheekbone. So I just acquired a new sign name this week and that I'm excited about. This one here that I'm showing you. So do you want to expand more on who I am, or is that good enough?
No, I think that's great. So I just offered a brief explanation about an assignment that we offered to our professional community, and we shared a screenshot about the specific verbiage that was shared. And then I will wrap up with what I have to share, and then we'll move on to you, Lorie. So for those of you who just saw that screenshot and had the opportunity to read it, that screenshot was an indication that we were looking to fulfill an assignment. And obviously I recognize that I am myself a white male, I have white privilege, and I am in spaces existing as a white male. And so when I received that request, it didn't really ring any or raise any red flags for us. We put that request out, we attempted to fulfill the assignments, we fulfilled the first 3, and we were trying to get that last one. And as you saw indicated in that screenshot, it was a discussion about white supremacy. And so absolutely there were triggers, but my team and I did not have those internal triggers. We got the assignment, we put the assignment out. What we saw was that there was an indication that it was a religious service. And then of course, white supremacy, we thought, wow, that was a bit odd. And so with our platform, we let the consumers or the requesting entity input all of the information that they need. So they categorize it themselves. And so they categorized it as a religious service, and we put it out there. It wasn't until Lorie reached out to me sometime in the future, at a later time, to talk about this and to talk about what insight that she has about why this issue was such a trigger.
So for the first time, I took a look at this request, and it was pretty shocking to me at that moment. I wasn't exactly sure how I should respond to this, how I should approach the situation. I do know most interpreters say that there's information that's always missing from a request. So contact the interpreting agency to delve a little bit more deeply to see if you could acquire some more information about the assignment. I did not feel comfortable with it, unfortunately. I was actually a little bit fearful as I approached this particular request. I was trying to process it, trying to think about how to approach it, what types of words that I should say. And in my mind, I had so many things that were coming up that it pretty much kept me stuck in a position that I couldn't do anything about it. So I just said, you know what, Lorie, just go ahead and ignore it. If you don't want the assignment, just find some work elsewhere. Just leave it alone. It's not for you. Don't attend to it. Yet and still, a month, 2 months, 3 months later, it was still something that came up that frustrated me. And I felt that I had not addressed my true feelings with this assignment and the way it was sent out, it was blasted out. So I had spoken with friends, mentors, peers, people who worked with me, who worked above me. And I was wondering if I would receive any backlash if I were to bring up this idea, bring up the situation and my feelings, if I were to discuss it further. So how would I involve myself without receiving that negative backlash, without receiving any type of harassment or bullying from what I wanted to share? It was an interesting process that I went through. It was very difficult for me to deal with my feelings. I felt extremely emotional. I felt lost. I felt alone and isolated. I continued to speak with other people in my environment to ask them, what should I do next? What are my next steps? And it wasn't until much later that I really sat down, had a conversation with a mentor, and just vented, expressed my feelings from A through Z. My mentor knew someone at the agency and said, you know what? This particular job, is this what you're talking about? Is this, oh, wow, this is not a correct approach. So that interpreter then spoke to my mentor and said, you know what, you should reach out to the interpreting agency. I waffled a little bit with that idea, probably for another month or so. And finally, in the month of April, I sent the email out to the agency. I was able to confront my emotions. I was able to figure out a way to speak up and be open and begin a dialogue about this particular assignment. And so that's led us to be here today.
That's fantastic. And first and foremost, I want to thank you for your approach and your willingness to engage us in this dialogue and this unpacking this evening. I recognize that it can certainly be emotional for people. It can be triggering for individuals. And certainly we can have this discussion over the course of the next hour that may trigger emotions within our attendees. But it is important for us to really take a close look at how we disseminate our requests so as not to cause these triggers within our networks. And it would help us to be able to really, really fine tune our processes.
Yes, and to be very honest, I felt quite triggered. I was very upset. I felt hurt. I felt as if that in particular interpreting agency did not consider the protection of their interpreters of color as they sent this interpreting request out. They didn't consider that pool of interpreters. There was no follow-up. There was no email that went out to say, hey, trigger warning, or to apologize after the fact. There was no type of resolve to this.
I want to thank you for sharing your experience. For me, it triggered me, the fact that it triggered you and the impact that it had on you. And as an interpreter, that can affect your work, how you engage with other clients, how you work with the community. So it definitely had an impact on you. And that's what we want to discuss today. What does it mean to have a safe space? What does that mean for our interpreters? for our agency to hold accountability in that space. And so what's your view of that word for it to be better going forward with that kind of situation? Can you tell us what a safe space would mean for you personally?
When I really started to analyze myself, to take a look inward, and to just think about what the systems are that are in place, and to discuss with other people how we begin to establish something new. How do we red flag something in a system? How do we create a warning sign or a trigger warning for people, for interpreters in the system? As I began to think about that and discuss it with other people, I was thinking of maybe setting up a profile, saying, what type of assignments are you willing to accept? What type of information would you like to have disseminated once you get that email request coming through? Those types of minutia type details. We began to discuss that. And hopefully we will be able to get the perspective of more interpreters, not just me, some people who are watching today and participating in this panel. Maybe we can come up with some ideas, some type of system where you can red flag an assignment, something of that nature.
You know, I have to say that one challenge about this red flag concept is thinking about who determines what is or is not a red flag. You know, for some assignments, it might be sort of on the fence, but not quite a red flag. Others might be glaringly obvious. But the question is how do we decide when it really is a red flag?
And that's exactly right. So that's why we're here to have this open dialogue. It would be great to have a conversation with interpreters to discuss this. What determines what a red flag is? What triggers you? We need to find out specifically in different categories what red flag warnings should look like and which assignment should have that label. We do need to continue having conversation from this point on with our interpreters, specifically regarding this area.
And it was interesting because some interpreters really do have triggers regarding like IEP meetings or healthcare or even about COVID. So everyone has various lenses that they see the world through. And so it's not a one size fits all. And so are we able to judge what would be triggering for an interpreter? Can we predict what would be triggering for everyone? That would be very, very hard. So should we tell interpreters as they sign up with an agency, please jot off on this list what you are unwilling to interpret for, whether it be abortions or IEP meetings or whatever? Would that be a good suggestion so that interpreters feel that they could then decide what to do and what jobs to accept? So should we start doing that? Would any agency be able to do that? Would that create a better safe space for interpreters? Or maybe a more healthy space would be a better vocabulary word. I want to know your thoughts about that. What's your opinion about having that type of list that interpreters would fill out?
You're exactly right, Andrea. And honestly, we live in this new era, right? We all have to keep in the back of our minds that times are changing. The world as a whole is changing. We as interpreters, interpreting agencies, interpreters of color, interpreters in general, we all need to keep in mind, at the forefront of our minds, what are we doing? How can we improve what we are doing? The changes that are occurring, how do we stretch our mind to encompass these things that are happening in the world? You know, before, with old school interpreters and the old way of doing things, that was great for them, but it doesn't fit now. We need to incorporate new ways of being and operating into who we are. I wish that I could expand a little bit more on that, but
no, feel free to do it. Feel free to expand. That's what we're here for. Please feel free to share. You know, this is an open forum. This is what we're here for. We're here to listen, so don't hold back.
So one other thing that came to mind after we had this conversation with Lorie initially was how agencies in general, not just Linguabee, but agencies nationwide, because I sincerely doubt that we are the first agency that has encountered this issue. And I sincerely doubt that we are not going to be, you know, that it's not going to end here. I think this is probably going to happen again. But one thought that I had, well, and one thing that my team discussed was, you know, the researcher, right? That we get this individual and have this person responsible to sort of, you know, survey all of the assignments and just make sure that they are appropriate to send out to the interpreting community. So, that's a struggle that of my own. When I think of, they've put in a request, who am I to alter this request and then send it off? It's not really direct representation. So it leaves a lot of conflicting feelings within me when I think about editing something that I did not initially author. So perhaps we have an individual on staff who looks through the request and then reaches out to them directly about possible editing, or maybe to help narrow down the search for an appropriate interpreter, as opposed to just getting it and sending the request out without a lot of thought.
Yes, and also you have to think about who we're serving. Who are our clients? Who are our consumers? We serve the deaf community, correct? And we do not want to set the deaf community up for failure. We want to make sure that they're satisfied, that they're happy, that the interpreter or interpreters we're providing are the correct interpreters that match the identity of the assignment, making sure the interpreters are not just certified, but also qualified, and making sure that the interpreting agency can satisfy all of the requests that are needed to accommodate a particular assignment, one out of many. So yes, we do have room for improvement. And I just try to stay open-minded. I try to lead with an open heart. I know that people have good intentions. Nobody is intending to hurt anyone. You're just trying to get a request fulfilled, right? But at the same time, the client has needs, and we need to fulfill those needs as well.
And I completely agree with you. I think a few things came to mind as you were talking. Some interpreters, really have biases, internal biases. And the interpreting agency has their biases too. So it comes back to, how do we dismantle that? Who is overseeing that? Is that our responsibility, or is it the other person's responsibility to ask for more information? Like if you receive a request as an interpreter, as the interpreter, would you do the double checking, the fact checking on that, or would the agency do that? Who is double checking these biases? Like the assignment that you're saying that you received, the requester is who? Is it from a church? Is it a religious service? And what exactly is the assignment? What does it mean? Is it a private discussion, or is it a public discussion where it's actually a stage where someone is on and talking about this information? So how do we meet those accessibility needs? The clients that we're serving, let's say if it's a church, for instance, we're just going to accept this assignment and just say we're going to ask for any interpreter. We need to think about the client. Is it a religious client? Because then what biases does that incorporate? Is it just a workshop? So it's really important for us to delve into who is responsible to look at these biases. Is it the interpreters? Is it the interpreting agency? Or is it both?
There's so many layers and so many factors.
There are layers. You're so right.
As for me, I feel like perhaps sending out a survey of some sort, asking for assistance from interpreters, getting feedback from the interpreting community. How can we improve our system? Give us ideas, give us the information that you would like for us to know. We have our policies as an agency, we have our rules, etc. But how can we improve to better service you? And sometimes you just really have to learn how to evolve with the times,
There are so many layers to this topic, and our biases really can impact our interpreters and interpreting agencies, as well as the consumers. It's like a triangle effect, right? A triangular effect. You have the interpreters who decide whether to accept an assignment or not. You have the agency who's coordinating the assignment, and you have the requester or the consumer who's part of the assignment. And all are going to be impacted by these decisions. So you have the interpreter, and the interpreter can decide, this job is not the best fit for me. I'm not going to accept this job. Or if I do accept this job, for example, the assignment that was passed out before that you were talking about, suppose you show up, and what if it's actually an assignment that's inappropriate for you to be at? Maybe it's triggering for you. Maybe it's a KKK assignment, or maybe some other type of protest against BIPOC interpreters, and you are a BIPOC interpreter. So that's where the biases are going to conflict. The client still wants access, but what does the interpreter do in that moment? And who is responsible? Is it the agency? Is it the interpreter? I think we really need to dismantle the system and figure out and make sure that our biases are not affecting other people's needs in the triangle, or our safe space is not being affected as well.
I agree with that 100%.
You know, and as I listen to you, I think about the fact that when an agency gets a request, you know, it's quite possible that, you know, for example, like you just mentioned, a KKK meeting or something of that nature. And as an agency, you know, obviously we want to provide services in general. That is the nature, that is the crux of this business. However, I also don't want to support a body of individuals that are doing things like that. So, you know, we have obviously Republicans and Democrats who have their own meetings, and we send interpreters, and obviously there are conflicting opinions between those groups, but they have every right to have those meetings internally, right?
Right.
However, when you have groups that are promoting hate, the question is how does an agency deal with that?
And that's quite the sticky situation now, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree. I believe we really can't even answer that question. It's such a complicated question. Very hard to answer.
Yes, because suppose someone were to accept that job and I go there myself in person and I find out it's not a safe space for me as a Black woman. I could really be hurt, literally. And the interpreting agency cannot ensure my safety in those moments. To be honest, there's nothing you can do about it.
So true.
So that then causes more issues to develop.
You are right, because safety is so important. And the concept of a safe space is kind of difficult to describe, and it's difficult to achieve. How do we make sure that everyone is safe? But most importantly, how does the company ensure that? Like Linguabee as an agency, for example, you know, are we publicly supporting? What are the values? What are their beliefs? Does the community know what we stand for, what that company stands for? Or what organization is promoting? You know, if an organization is promoting hate, for example, and then Linguabee contracts with that organization, does that align with the values of Linguabee? Do we promote that at Linguabee? So as a community, when we look at the agency that we're contracting with, you know, what are their values? Like Sorensen, for example, what are their values? I think it's our responsibility as contractors too, and as community members, to really research our options and research our needs and make sure that they're being met and that no one is being hurt in the process. Are we oppressing each other by trying to do these things? Are we promoting hate by attending these events or promoting these events? So something to consider.
It's a real conundrum. Like, it's very tough to say.
So for BIPOC interpreters, we definitely need more BIPOC interpreters. Some don't feel safe within community and within the interpreting field as a whole. There's a lot of racism. There's a lot of underlying oppression, direct oppression, indirect oppression. So the field as a whole and the interpreting agencies do hold accountability to expand their services in a meaningful way to keep our interpreters safe too. I want to put that out there. That is something to consider.
My question is, what does that conversation look like? What are the conversations that interpreting agencies are having with these clients? Compared to before, what does it look like now? What have the changes been? What type of evolution has taken place? I'm just wondering.
I love that question. I love that question.
I also think that that's a fantastic question. And one thing that I struggle with is advertising that we are hosting a workshop on white privilege or recognizing our white privilege. I feel like that is something internally that we have to unpack, but by advertising that, you know, I feel like that's akin to bragging. It's almost like, hey, I'm getting points.
And that also is triggering as well.
And so the question is, how can one person or a company, an agency, you know, indicate that they are trying to be part of change?
That's a good point. Good perspective. It depends on who is sponsoring the advertisement, who's sponsoring the particular workshop. If it's truly a workshop, perhaps, let's say, National Black Deaf Advocates, NBDA, for example. If they are providing a workshop and regarding white privilege, white supremacy, the dissolution of it, how to improve spaces, you know, those types of concepts, perhaps that would be something where the Black community, Black deaf members of the community, Black interpreters would listen up and say, okay, this is great. This is an opportunity for us to go in, for us to ask the hard questions, to make sure that this safest space for us to do so. There would be members of the interpreting community who are Black, who are providing service. That could be something that you would sponsor that would make people sit up and pay attention.
That's a really good thought. And so to answer that about interpreting agencies, for example, like Linguabee, would they be able to make sure that they're part of change? I think one way to do that is, how are you actively changing? What does that look like? Are you showing up at conferences? Or is it actually hiring more BIPOC people on your staff? Or is it actually, you know, speaking out publicly on forums and saying, hey, we support Black Lives Matter? Or I think that the word change in organization, it's not just a word, whether it be the Black community, Asian community, or Hispanic community. We want to see a change, you know, and it's up to the it's up to the organization to take a stance on that, to say we support this. And can you really do that without asking for the thoughts of the communities? It's like with the hearing systems, you know, the deaf are saying, well, can you do this or that? But they need to prove their allyship on their own. They need to show without us telling them what to do. And I believe it's the same thing with interpreting agencies. You need to make sure BIPOC interpreters are safe, you know, without pestering the community. Basically, it's your responsibility to make those decisions on your own. It's tough, really, because I know, you know, white allies want to say, oh, we're doing the right thing, we're doing this and that. And we're like, well, that's great. But at the same time, you know, do you just get points? Do you get brownie points for saying all the things that you're doing? We want authenticity. And where is that? That we're not looking for brownie points, you know, because that could go away in a year. You do it for 1 year and then you stop next year. Is that really an ally? But who is monitoring that process? You know, are you in it for the long haul, so to speak? And so I believe that's where we need to talk about what type of active change as an organization you're trying to do. Are you just talking, or are you walking the walk as well, so to speak?
And that's exactly right. We want to see the actions behind the words.
And I think this one is one example. You know, Linguabee hosting this and talking about it. That's one way to show that you want change. But most agencies may be in this situation and they'll sweep it under the rug and act like it never happened. But you are allowing this to be an open forum to talk about the change. But how can we make sure the BIPOC interpreters feel that this is going to happen ongoing? You know, I can trust this agency. They're going to keep me safe. It's really up to the organization to make sure that those changes are lasting and not just for one day.
Absolutely. And I actually have one question before we open it up to the Q&A. For individuals who do have a question, please do feel free to raise your hand in the chat. But one question that I do have is, you indicated that you did not feel comfortable with our initial approach when you got that email and that you sat with it for a while. You know, suppose an agency, NBDA, for example, they were an interpreting agency. And if they were to have sent that identical request, would you have felt more comfortable through them? And if that's the case, what's the dialogue there?
Yes, definitely. Because I know their identity is the same as mine for the most part. Your agency is actually new for me. I had yet to accept any work from the company yet. And so that was part of the reason why I hesitated and why I was ambivalent in my approach.
So I want to ask you a question, Lorie. Dealing directly with this, whether it be another agency, Linguabee or MBDA, if you feel, because you knew that Linguabee was a white organization, or did you not know that they were, what was the lens you were looking at? What was the lens that was coming from? Just wondering your point of view when you received that initial email.
Initially, it had nothing to do with the company itself. That wasn't even a thought in my head. My hesitance referred to the first word that I saw on the request was white supremacy. I saw that, and in combination with the words religious services, I was automatically triggered. In looking at the request, I thought, well, is Linguabee a company that supports this? White supremacy? Where are they coming from? If something should happen as a result of this assignment, who's there to protect me? I didn't have a clue. So those were the two immediate thoughts that came to me. Because Linguabee, as I said, I wasn't sure. I had never really worked with Linguabee as of that point. And so I guess perhaps it was half and half, my hesitance because of Linguabee and because of the assignment.
Okay, thank you for answering that.
And so also in terms of reaching out, it was a matter of, well, how do I reach out to the company and let them know my reticence about this assignment?
And of course, being triggered in that same moment too.
At this present moment, I don't see any hands up on the Zoom screen, but I do see a typed comment from Mallory asking a point of clarification. Oh, actually, they are going to ask that question live. Well, let me just clarify. The question was, is this the first time that we are having this discussion with Lorie? Or is this a private discussion that has already taken place and we are getting part of the aftermath? So my answer to that is we actually did have a discussion. Lorie did reach out to us, I think sometime in April. We did have a video chat and it was a fantastic conversation. At least I thought so. It was very enlightening from my end. I appreciated Lorie's perspective. I'm not sure how Lorie felt immediately after, but I did feel personally that discussion, I just did not want that discussion to stay internal. I didn't want to keep it to myself. I felt like that this is not something I wanted to share over time, but rather something I would like to go public with. And so I had reached out to Lorie. Lorie was all game. And so we brought this discussion to you. So I am curious, Lorie, how did you feel about the conversation when it was private in nature previously?
That's a good question. So are you asking the audience or?
No, actually, that question is for you, Lorie. I'm asking you directly. After you and I had the conversation, how did you feel?
So just to clarify, we had our conversation. You clarified, as you did at the beginning of this talk, that there were 4 particular workshops for this assignment. And the moment that you expressed that to me, it was a sigh of relief because it made me aware that, oh, this is an assignment where people are being educated. Had I known this prior, perhaps I wouldn't have even have had this conversation with you. I wouldn't have felt this way. Maybe this was a setup from God. There was a reason behind me not knowing the prior information that would have helped me feel okay about receiving this assignment request. But for some reason, not having the prior knowledge of, this was a 4-part series. These are people who are being educated, regarding white supremacy, I didn't know that. And so I came in and it triggered me and it just caused me to feel some type of way, to be honest. And so I was unable, from the time I received the request to April, I was unable to let go of this. Like I said, I talked with friends, family, mentors. It bothered me from the time I received it until the time I talked with Bucky.
And I think this conversation, for me personally, watching this dialogue, I can see how it really impacted you. And it's not a minor thing. People here watching this, I think, can recognize you being vulnerable, and we appreciate you sharing your feelings with us because you didn't have to do that. And so that is something that we as a community should recognize and be mindful of for interpreters, interpreting agencies, and the community as a whole, to how do we properly keep each other safe? That is our responsibility, to make sure, because my words have impact. That word, white supremacy, whoever typed that, was that the title of a presentation? Or did they just say it's just a subject matter that was going to be discussed? It was really important for them to delve more into that. And I believe it's a great idea to have a researcher who makes sure that these requests are appropriate in nature so that we know what jobs interpreters will accept, not accept, and that the interpreters and the interpreting agency both can keep each other safe. I believe that's the best approach going forward. So should we as a community, encourage all interpreting agencies to change their platforms? That's something that we can talk about more and delve into, I think, tonight. How does the community feel about this?
I think that would be great.
So it looks like we have two hands. So I'd like to invite Alex to turn on their camera.
Yeah, you were talking about allyship, and I just wanted to say I support BIPOC interpreters, but what about diversity trainings? And do you have that type of thing in your company? I'm just wondering what type of trainings you provide, saying that you support BIPOC interpreters, but what are you actually doing?
That is a great question. There is actually another question on the Q&A. I'm going to actually read that right now. And this individual has said, hey, I know that there are a few spaces where I have had to confront white supremacy, and I am wondering if there is a plan to call out other agency owners and have them take on some accountability and stop working on the backs of BIPOC interpreters and not addressing this problematic behavior from white colleagues. And right now, as far as my company, we are all white, and I absolutely recognize that. And I continue to struggle with diversity in my company. And my pool, my network, those whom I'm associated with, it is obvious, it's evident that I don't have strong enough connections to the BIPOC community. And that's something I need to change. It's something that I want to work on. And I think where my company is right now is we are going through a lot of internal structural changes. The last 2 or 3 months has been completely insane for us. Once that shift begins to slow down, you can look forward to us providing or having internal trainings where we unpack white privilege and various topics. But I don't want this to be a quote unquote weekend thing or a Wednesday luncheon where we have a presenter for 2 hours and okay, it's all said and done and let's get back to work. What we're really looking at is getting someone every single week for the next year, every single week, and maybe even longer, just long enough for us to be able to open up this dialogue. And that is a goal that I have. And it is something that again, it's not shame per se, but really it's about, we need to do this work of unpacking. We need to work through it. And so my response is yes, that this discussion, that this session that we're having opens up that gateway for other agencies to start thinking about their practices and the damages that they're causing and their responsibility to mitigate and take accountability. But as far as myself, I bear accountability in terms of BIPOC interpreters and BIPOC colleagues. And I have to be responsible to be more proactive on this front.
It takes a lot of work, but it's entirely worth it.
Yes. And I do want to say, yes, I agree with that.
So we have another individual by the name of Lorie who is going to turn on their camera.
Yes, I do.
Lorie,
Lorie,
do you live in Sacramento?
I do.
Okay, so I know that individuals think that, white supremacy is something that can be addressed through an anti-racism session. And it's almost like riding a bike. Once you get on a bike, you're proficient. You never have to really practice again. But it's actually quite the opposite. It's something that you have to really immerse yourself in. But what I'm asking about right now is performative allyship. advertising about what it is you're doing, and, oh, hey, I read this book, and how to be an anti-racist. And, sometimes I struggle myself. Am I doing what is considered information sharing, or am I in fact bragging? And so what I'm wondering, because you're right, Lorie, it's a thin line. But the prior discussion talking about this company that was sending out this request that Bucky mentioned, there was an internal discussion, but I'm wondering at some point why you felt the need to mention that. Like, what was your thought process? What's your response to that, Lorie? In terms of, oh, they were providing a reason for what they did. Again, want my audience or my consumers or my interpreters to know that we are in fact a safe company, or we're, a productive company. But I think at the same time, you have to think about what was the intent behind sharing that? What was your goal behind making that announcement? And Lorie, how did you feel about that?
So I met with Bucky regarding my concerns in this particular assignment, and it was truly problematic for me. As I said earlier, I was obsessed this for the entire couple of months and not really understanding the reason behind it, behind this obsession, behind me perseverating on this problematic assignment. I was so emotional behind it. And it really, for me, felt like this is a new era. I need to speak up. I need to say something and not just sit, wagging my tail and wondering and being emotional about it. And so sometimes you feel like you're reinventing the wheel, so to speak.
I think there might be a little misunderstanding. I apologize. Let me clarify. I actually wasn't addressing you and you coming forward. I was actually addressing Bucky, because Bucky had recently mentioned that, hey, we as a company, we made this announcement. He offered an explanation, which sort of came across as an excuse to his consumers. So basically, if Linguabee wanted to let everybody know that they were hosting an internal training for our staff about diversity awareness, again, what is the intent? Is that clear? Does that make sense from a company standpoint?
So you're asking me, how would I feel about it if Linguabee were to announce that they were hosting some type of workshop, or?
So I think, again, it's the question of, why does this company feel it's necessary to let everybody know that they're going to host this training? Is it for the consumers? Is it for their interpreters? Is it for them? Why is this information about training their staff internally something that they are leading with? Again, this discussion about anti-racism or whatever these topics may be, shouldn't that be something that's conducted internally and kept internally? Why does this have to be an advertising point?
I think it should be information released to everyone for the long-term benefits of the company and for the interpreters. That's my opinion.
So Bucky here, I'm just going to rephrase what I'm saying. So if my company, Linguabee, is having a training internally for everyone, the question is why are we advertising to the greater community about why we're doing this training? Or should we in fact just do these trainings quietly without letting the community know that we're doing them? Right. So if you're having this training, you're doing it internally for your employees, and it's closed, it's not open, it's not available to the public, it's something that Linguabee is doing.
I think it's still beneficial either way to let everyone know.
Okay, got it. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you. Thank you. So, I have to say,
and I was thinking something too, performative allyship is very common in today's world with social media. People are always saying this and what they're doing. So Mallory brings up a good point. Agency-wide, do we need to advertise about that? And what would be the reason for that? Would that be for the community to say, okay, that's what you're doing? Or is it more of, showing up in various places, showing up at conferences, showing up at meetings, going there to really support in person, or sponsoring a BIPOC event, that type of thing, I believe, which is not performative and not really advertising, right? So I really believe that it's really the point is to affect change. If you're just looking to look good and get brownie points, like you said, that's not the point of being a real ally, right?
Those workshops are really beneficial for everyone. It's not just going to benefit those internally who are taking the workshop, the staff who are actually there. This has a domino effect for everyone, for anyone who would like to learn, who would like to be involved in this type of discussion.
Okay, so you brought up a good point. You brought up a good point. Another thing that came to mind for all companies is, I think someone at the beginning had asked, how do you diversify the staff via trainings, right? And that concept is outdated a little bit, I believe. Because it's like, okay, we're going to train on culture and we all sit there and learn about this culture. But then the person who trained us left, and how do we continue to implement that, not tokenism, but hiring that affects the change of culture in the workplace. That's where diversity comes from. That's where the work is done. That's the platform, I believe. Instead of just training someone and then having the trainer leave, how does that really affect change? In my opinion, I would think it would need to be something that could be sustained.
And at this point, we have another comment from Alexandria. Hello.
Yes, hello, it's me again. I wanted to say that I agreed with Andrea. And I think it's the same thing. It's important not just to have the diversity training, but to have the people there, people of color that are in management positions in the company. If everyone in the company is white, it's really hard for us as interpreters to feel supported in that space. So if you have the training, if we're willing to have the training to make sure, first of all, that you're reaching out to BIPOC interpreters, and then making sure that you have people of color in management positions, administrative positions, so that the BIPOC interpreters do feel supported. That was my last question for you. How can we make sure that we really feel supported after that? Thank you.
That's a great
point. Thank you. We have another individual by the name of Dustin who has raised their hand. Hello. So I have to say that this discussion has been fantastic, and I feel like it's been very healthy. It's important to have healthy discussions. I know when I got that text and I read it, I was like, I had to read it again. And that first opening word, white supremacy, and I felt like, whoa, no, like, what is going on? What is the point of this discussion? I mean, what's going to happen here? Like all of the things that you've recently alluded to, those thoughts crossed my mind as well. And so I just signed up for this, and I was really looking forward to this discussion. And, now hearing that, there were a series of workshops and there were 4 of them, and it was leading up to this, but, again, talking about having these trainings and calling it a one and done thing, in all honesty, training should be year round, all the time. It's not a specific day and a specific event. And it's like, hey, I've got this training and it's a part of me now, and I feel better about myself. And the reality is that's not the truth. It's a daily practice, right? The concept of this is it's daily. And what I'm seeing out in the community, it's not there. And looking at BIPOC interpreters, who are feeling it's not safe. They're not safe because there are so many issues right now with racism and bullying that I feel like, we have to take a look at these trainings being all the time. And these individuals in our field need to be taking them all the time, because recognizing privilege itself is crucial, because many people don't. Over the past couple of years and all of the chaos, people just thought, that doesn't involve me. It's not something I'm part of. But really, that's a deflective attitude. And really, that is where you have to really crack into it, right? You have to figure out where you are in the stream of things. You have to learn what your impact and what your involvement is. Get involved in that process. And so deflecting everything doesn't work, right? We're talking about action and being active. right? And so just these trainings are not once and done. It's all the time.
Thank you so for that comment. I wanted to expand on what you just mentioned, that I feel daily training, of course, or regular training is very important. People of color, whether it be Black or Latina, it's very important to have those type of training but still they don't have to, the white population does not have to live oppression. They don't experience it on a daily basis. So I want to thank you for that comment. I appreciate that coming from you.
So right. And then just one more thing. I know that people are so afraid of being called out in public spaces or just being called out in general. But honestly, I think call outs are healthy, right? They lead to healthy discussions. They lead to sort of like this internal job or work of having to figure out what it is that's happening on the inside, right? You know, professionally, personally, as an interpreter, what your contribution is to the field, you have to take a look at all of that. And calling it out is healthy. I think it's just healthy in general.
Thank you so much. I appreciate those sentiments. Thank you.
And yeah, in terms of call outs and calling in as well, right? What Lorie did was she called me in to have a direct conversation, and we did. But at the same time, there was a call out because we wanted other individuals to have this opportunity to learn from this situation as well. So if you call me out, there is a possibility I may be embarrassed. I may struggle for a response. That's something that I'm dealing with internally. But calling me out or us out allows everyone on the outside to learn from our mistake.
And sometimes some people are very much in resistance to that. People do not want to accept the change. People do not want to accept being called out. They're very resistant, very stubborn. Their attitude is, you can't tell me anything. And so you're unable to educate people who have this mindset most of the time. It's so important to do some internal analysis first before you even call anyone out, because you're affecting change. You want people to learn from this experience. You don't want people to feel oppressed or to feel that your approach is negative. You don't want that to happen. So you have to be very careful.
And I believe that the call out culture is it can be, sticky, as it were, that some people are like, don't talk to me like that. It can be a very sensitive topic, but really we're thinking of the situation. It's not about the person. So it's up to the person being called out to recognize that it's a culture of change. Sometimes calling in works and sometimes calling out is better. So whether it be for an agency or an individual, it depends on the approach that you're using and looking at the biases, right? What was my purpose of calling this person out or in? What was the result? Was it to affect change? There's really no right or wrong approach, but it's up to us to change how we own the call out or call in. And this is a dialogue that should be continuous, because BIPOC people go through it every single day. And we have to acknowledge that uncomfortability has to be comfortable. Sometimes you have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And that's what's going to happen.
Very true.
Okay, it looks like we only have a few minutes left at best. We have time for one more comment from the audience. In the meantime, if there are any closing comments, I know that from my end, what I'd like to say is what we're doing to improve on this specific situation and this specific experience is, again, looking at this 4-part series and only focusing on that one. They did not have the ability to fill it all with just one interpreter, which means that we really have to change how we send that assignment out, right? We should have included that it was part 4. It was the 4th part in the series. We should have included more information. And that's something that our team has been discussing. And that's just one quick element that we can do to improve, but also developing a screener for interpreters to indicate what it is that they're not willing to do or not comfortable with. So if we have a request that's related to this topic, that is something that we have to do a lot of work to developing, but it is something that's we're thinking about in terms of change, just so that we are more transparent and just filling in some of the missing pieces of information, right? So instead of worrying just about that entire assignment, And in fact, we only had that one, but we had information internally that didn't cause us to get too alarmed. But, you know, again, as an agency, we have responsibility to embed that additional information so that the community of interpreters can receive that request more efficiently.
And I would be willing to cooperate and to work with you to make these improvements.
And I also think that the agency, for example, that word white supremacy, it can be very triggering for anyone, honestly. Let's just be honest. That's a very triggering word, whether you're Black, Latino, Latinx, whatever it be. That's a very strong word. So maybe going forward, if a requester puts that in the topic, we might want to say presentation about white supremacy instead of just saying white supremacy, because those words in your face can be very alarming and triggering. We may need to ask, what is the intention of the discussion instead of just putting those words out there? So if we said abortion, was the topic, that could be very triggering for a lot of women. What is the context of this? And so the same concept would apply to the words white supremacy. Is it for shock value? Why are we using these alarming words as the subject matter? So we want to delve into that too. As an agency, it would be very important to get more information before disseminating that to the interpreters, gathering the information and saying, why are you leading with those words, so that that can be edited before it's sent out. And Lorie, did you just have any last concluding comments that you wanted to make before we conclude tonight?
No, but this conversation has really made me happy. I've really enjoyed being in conversation with you, listening and taking in what it is that you have to say, and knowing that you're willing to do the work to make the changes, to work together as a team, to see where the wrong has been and to work to right it actively. And so I'm looking forward to seeing those improvements as they come to fruition.
And I just want to say thank you so much for being a part of the Buzz Corner today. We appreciate you being here. And again, you did not have to be part of this discussion, but we do appreciate your investment, your willingness to be honest, to be vulnerable, it's an emotional labor of love, really. And so we want to thank you for sharing that. I personally want to say I've heard you, I empathize with you, and I appreciate you being here. Thank you for holding space.
Of course, thank you so much for this opportunity.
Until next time.
Good night, everyone. Good night.
Goodbye.